Welcome, everybody, to the Cincinnati Reds Weekly Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I'm your host for the Cincinnati Reds Weekly Show, Mike Goodpaster. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about Nick Senzel and Jesse Winkler and which one would be most likely to be traded. And we got to kind of let the debate begin here as the Cincinnati Reds finally made the acquisition of Shogo Akiyama, official on Monday, signing the 31-year-old Japanese outfielder to a 3-year, $21 million contract. The addition of Akiyama brings intrigue and questions along with it. Is the Reds' outfield too crowded? And if so, is Jesse Winkler or Nick Senzel most likely to be traded? To say the Reds' outfield is overcrowded is a huge understatement. Akiyama, Senzel, Winkler join a roster with the likes of Aristides Aquino, Scott Schebler, Nick Martini, Mark Payton, Travis Jankowski, Phillip Ervin, and Josh Van Meter. Now, not everyone is going to get a spot on the opening day roster. In fact, at most, you're likely to see just 6 names in that Reds outfield on the opening day roster. Now, to be fair, the likelihood of Martini or Schebler making the roster is not great. Jankowski profiles more as a defensive replacement, but could carve out a niche on next year's squad as a defensive replacement. Payton is a Rule 5 draft pick, so his inclusion is a must unless the team wants to lose him. And Van Meter is a guy who can play several positions, meaning he has flexibility and could squeeze on this roster as a backup. That still leaves the outfield a bit crowded. Aquino showcased his talent last summer and will likely open spring training with an inside edge to be the team's everyday right fielder. Ervin mashed against lefties last season and can play all 3 positions in the outfield, making him a great option as the team's 4th outfielder. That leaves Senzel and Winkler, likely duking it out for an everyday role on next year's team. This isn't even taking into account Cincinnati's continued pursuit of Marcell Ozuna. So if one of those 2 players has to go, which one should the Reds choose? So we're going to examine that today, the case for trading for and against both outfielders. And we're going to start off with Nick Senzel. The idea of trading Senzel, the team's top prospect for the last several seasons, seems kind of crazy to me. The Reds invested a first-round pick in order to land Senzel, bounced him all over the diamond in an effort to get him to the big leagues, kept him in the minors just long enough to alter his free agent status, and now you want to trade him? No way, right? That's what you would think. But you got to hold on just 1 minute here. While many scouts, experts, pundits, and fans agree that Senzel has the potential to be a top-flight player in MLB, he's not without his flaws. Senzel began his pro career as a third baseman, but with the play of Eugenio Suarez, the team decided to switch Senzel to second base, hoping to see him take the reins at that position. An unexpected outburst from waiver wire pickup Scooter Gennett slowed the Reds' process of elevating Senzel to the big leagues, as did a few bouts with some strange and concerning injuries. The club made the decision last season to transition Senzel to center field. While obviously not a gold glover in the outfield, Senzel can definitely hold his own, and he did during his first season. Senzel played 104 games last season, but was placed on the injured list near the end of his rookie campaign following a shoulder injury. The 20-year-old finished 2019 with a slash line of .256, .315, and .427 to go along with 12 home runs and 42 RBIs. By all accounts, Senzel has the opportunity to be one of the best players on the Cincinnati roster this season. After getting his first taste of big league pitching last season, making the transition to center field, the University of Tennessee product will be expected to be a key piece of this coming year's lineup. Now, should a need arise, Senzel also may be able to help the Reds on the infield dirt, though the signing of Mike Moustakas alleviates the need for Senzel to play second base. Freddie Galvis is the team's best option at shortstop. And though he's only played 1 professional inning at the position, one would think Senzel could make that transition also. Now, in terms of trading away one of the best young players in the organization, the only way I see Cincinnati dealing Senzel is if the Reds were able to work out a deal with the Cleveland Indians for the superstar Francisco Lindor. And while Senzel has the potential to eventually reach the same level as Lindor, the Indians shortstop is a 4-time All-Star with game-altering capabilities. Now, whether playing center field, shortstop, or any other position on the field, Senzel can be a difference maker. If Senzel were to be the centerpiece of a trade for Lindor, while tough, I think the Reds would have to include last year's rookie in that deal. However, no other player likely to be on the trade block is worth sacrificing Senzel's future in Cincinnati. Now, let's go to Jesse Winker and look at the 4 pros and cons for trading him. I mean, Winkler, there's no doubt, brings an energy and enthusiasm to the ball club that few others on Cincinnati's team do. You know, he's kind of got a playful nature with fans, chest bumps with teammates. The constant rah-rah attitude makes Winkler very likable. But that doesn't always translate to success on the field. And it leads some to believe that Winkler should be packaged in a trade before the season even begins. Winkler's biggest downfall may be the injuries he suffered both in 18 and 19. The 26-year-old ended his season on the injured list. Last year, Winkler played in 114 games, while the prior year he only made it through 89. The injuries definitely have to be a concern, but one could say the same for Senzel. Another knock on Winkler is his inability to hit against left-handed pitchers. And to be fair, David Bell didn't give Winkler many opportunities to prove that he could hit against southpaws, oftentimes substituting Phillip Ervin or even Jose Peraza for the left-handed slugger. Winkler got off to a horrendous start last season, but righted the ship and finished 2019 with a career high of 16 home runs and 38 RBIs. Winkler has a few more red flags, though. And while his defense was improved last season, Winkler is not an elite defender. While Senzel doesn't have that type of player profile either, Winkler is not even close to the athlete Senzel is. Winkler lacks speed on the base paths and in the outfield. Though not asked to do, I think it's plausible that Senzel could play every outfield spot. Winkler simply can't. Now, while most fans and experts would likely agree that Senzel is the better of the 2 ball players and has a higher ceiling, that doesn't make Winkler an instant candidate to be traded. In fact, there's a lot of things Winkler does well that make him a player who can very easily be a leader on next year's team. Winkler is historically a high on-base percentage guy, something highly regarded in today's game with the analytics. The former first-round draft pick also has good power from the left side, another highly coveted quality in Major League Baseball. Winkler may not have that everyday player label that Senzel does, but that doesn't mean Cincinnati should just ship him out of town. I, for one, can see an upside in keeping Winkler at the age of just 26. I mean, he's relatively young by baseball standards, does not even reach his first year of arbitration eligibility until next offseason. However, those are qualities other franchises would look highly upon as well, making Winkler a viable trade candidate. When it comes to potential deals for Winkler, I don't think he moves the needle enough for clubs to include a top-notch star like Lindor. However, with the free agent reliever market drying up, perhaps Winkler could be dealt for some bullpen help. The Cincinnati Reds have some decisions to make and plenty of options as well. There's still the possibility that both Winkler and Senzel are on next year's team. But I think a positive change would be in order for that to happen. Both Senzel and Winkler possess several desirable tools that can help the Reds win in 2020 or could be used to secure another piece or two through a trade. Now, where this gets more complicated is what happens if the Reds, what would be the trade scenarios if the Reds signed St. Louis Cardinals star Marcell Ozuna? And there's still rumors that indeed the Reds are still interested and the front office is still trying to wheel and deal. Now, if they bring Ozuna in, I think that changes the trade scenarios. And despite signing Shogu Akiyama, they're still rumored in the hunt for Ozuna. If Ozuna and Cincinnati agree on a long-term deal, several players on the Reds roster suddenly become potential trade chips. And with the front office's pledge to make a return to postseason in 2020, what trades might the Reds make if Ozuna is added to the roster? So we're going to look at possible trades if Ozuna comes to the Reds. And I think if Ozuna comes, I think the Reds are going to be able to complete that blockbuster deal for Francisco Lindor. And I would think you send a Nick Senzel, a Nick Lodolo, Jonathan India, and you could get Francisco Lindor. Now, Lindor won't come cheap. As I said, you're going to have to give up Nick Senzel. So what might a trade for Lindor look like? I think Senzel is the guy that gets that done. Now, when you look at a Cincinnati Reds possible starting opening day lineup of Ozuna, Akiyama, and Aquino, the Reds have a big-time formidable lineup. Add to that the bats of Votto, Moustakas, Suarez, Lindor, and the Reds simply don't have a hole in the lineup. Now, sacrificing Senzel and a couple prospects may be enough to snag Lindor away from Cleveland, and I think it's something they definitely need to look at, especially if they can get Ozuna in here. If they get Ozuna in here, I think they're one of the top 2 or 3 favorites in the National League to go to the World Series. Now, they need to definitely get a relief pitcher, and I think Joe Jimenez is the guy who enters there. He's 1 year removed from a spot in the All-Star game. He struggled last year for 4.37 ERA, but at 24 years old, Jimenez is still very young and under team control through 2023. The Tigers are going nowhere fast, and a few talented prospects could be enough to sway their front office. Now, the Reds bullpen has the talented Lorenzen, along with lefty Amir Garrett and a surprising Robert Stevenson at the back end heading into 2020. The biggest question mark in the bullpen may be Raul Iglesias, who had a tumultuous 2019 season, and it ended with the closer being hung with a team record of 12 losses for a reliever. So to get Joe Jimenez, I think you could give up a guy like T.J. Friedel, Vladimir Gutierrez, and I'm not suggesting that Jimenez is going to replace Iggy as the closer, but I think it's something. The right-hander definitely has the stuff to come out and close a game. And Jimenez earned 9 saves in 2019 for the Tigers, and his fastball sits in the mid to upper 90s according to Fangraphs, and Jimenez's average heater was sitting at 95.5 miles per hour. Jimenez was once a top 5 prospect in the Tigers organization, according to the MLB pipeline, and after a season in which Jimenez has, jumped to HR9, jumped to almost 3 times what it was in 2018, Detroit may be willing to sell low here. And, I think this is a signing that would help the Reds bullpen immensely. Now, a third trade I would like to see the Reds made would be to get left-handed pitcher Jarlin Garcia from the Miami Marlins. I think of Phillip Ervin, Jared Solomon. I think that would be a trade that could get that done. And with Garcia, I think you have a pitcher with a high upside. And Garcia is, he's a left-handed pitcher, which the Reds definitely need a left-hander. So I think a lot of what happens the remainder of this offseason is dependent on the Reds' decision to sign or steer clear of Marcell Ozuna. And the sluggers list has apparently been narrowed to just a few teams, with Cincinnati being in that mix. And adding Ozuna to next year's roster would certainly allow Dick Williams and Nick Krall the flexibility to trade for some very valuable pieces. And if they do that, I think what you'll see is a Reds lineup that, I know when you look at Vegas right now, or the line I looked today, the Reds were predicted to win 90 games, and they were the favorite to win the National League Central Division. And it's been a while since we've seen that. And as we get closer to the season, it gets more exciting. Pitchers and catchers report next month. And you can find us every week on the Cincinnati Reds Weekly Show on The Grueling Truth. You can follow us at Grueling Truth. And all of our shows are on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. Wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So, this has been Mike Goodpaster, and you've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.